The Iron Bastion loomed over the crimson-streaked plains, a fortress of steel and shadow carved from the very blood of ancient battles. Its walls forged in unbreakable oaths and bound by rituals older than the kingdom itself, pulsed with a life of their own. Varek stood at the gates, the weight of his mission pressing heavily on his shoulders. His hands, calloused from years of servitude to the city's iron code, gripped a rusted, ceremonial dagger, the key to a pact that should never have been made. Beside him, the scent of iron and magic twisted into the air, an oppressive reminder of what lay ahead. Mira, a hardened warrior with eyes that mirrored the steel of the bastion, stepped forward, her armor whispering with each movement. "The council won't wait long," she said, her voice clipped but betraying a flicker of concern. Varek's jaw tightened, but he gave a short nod. Mira had always believed in the Bastion's rights, yet even she could sense that this oath was different, dangerous. The question hung unspoken between them. Who would pay the price if this promise turned false? Tarin, the Bastion's enigmatic oathkeeper, watched them from the shadows of the gate's archway. His slender form was wrapped in dark, silken robes that whispered with the secrets of the bound. As the youngest oathkeeper in the city's history, Tarin wielded a mastery over blood magic that even the elders feared. "Are you prepared, Varek?" Tarin asked, his voice a quiet echo. The question seemed simple, yet each word carried the weight of countless broken and kept oaths. Varek's gaze locked onto Tarin's, and for a heartbeat he wondered if he'd emerge from this city with his soul intact. Thunder rolled above, a grim reminder of the Bastion's wrath, and Varek took a step forward. The city seemed to breathe around him, steel groaning and whispering in a language that only the bound could hear. His pulse thudded as he followed Mira and Tarin into the heart of the Bastion, the ceremonial dagger feeling heavier with each step. Yet within that shadowed path lay secrets, and perhaps a false oath waiting to be unravelled. The gates closed behind them with a resounding boom, sealing their fates within the Iron Bastion's unyielding walls. As the echoes died, the dagger in Varek's hand seemed to whisper, a promise of betrayal waiting to be revealed. The Iron Bastion's heart was a labyrinth of jagged hallways and steel corridors, echoing with the whispers of ancient pacts. Varek could feel the eyes of oath-bound spirits watching him from the shadows, their judgment as heavy as the dagger in his grip. Beside him, Mira moved with disciplined grace, her hand never straying far from the hilt of her sword. They had both fought countless battles, yet this silent march through the Bastion's core felt more perilous than any war. The blood oath pulsed in Varek's veins, a reminder that even the smallest misstep could lead to ruin. As they neared the Chamber of Vows, the air thickened with the scent of rust and magic, making every breath feel like a struggle. Tarin led the way, his dark robes trailing over the cold steel floors. His eyes seemed distant, as though he could hear voices that no one else could. "We're not alone," he murmured, his voice sending a chill down Varek's spine. Varek gritted his teeth, unwilling to show fear, but when a shadow shifted in the periphery, he couldn't ignore the dread coiling in his gut. Someone, or something, was watching them. Mira's eyes narrowed. "Stay close," she whispered, and Varek nodded. They stepped into the Chamber of Vows, a vast room lined with towering iron statues. Each statue bore the visage of a past oathkeeper, their eyes glowing crimson with the magic of promises sealed and sins committed. Tarin moved to the centre of the chamber, his fingers tracing the runes inscribed into the stone altar. "The truth lies within the blood," he said, drawing a small ceremonial blade. Varek knew what was expected of him. Blood for blood. A price for a promise. He stepped forward, rolling up his sleeve, but a sudden noise, like metal grinding against metal, made everyone freeze. One of the iron statues had moved. Its eyes glowed brighter, and it raised a massive rusted sword. Mira was the first to react, unsheathing her blade with a swift, practiced motion. "We're under attack!" she yelled. Varek's heart pounded as more statues began to stir, ancient guardians waking to defend the sanctity of the chamber. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the room erupted into chaos. Varek's grip tightened on the dagger. Blood for blood. It was the only way to complete the ritual, but with iron giants coming to life, the price of their oath seemed higher than ever. He glanced at Tarin, whose eyes were wide with something that looked like fear, or perhaps realization. There was something wrong with this ritual, something false. The whispers of the chamber grew louder, and Varek knew they were running out of time. The Chamber of Vows had become a battlefield, with iron statues coming to life, their rusted swords slicing through the air with deadly precision. Varek barely managed to duck under a massive swing, the blade cutting through the stone altar he had been standing beside moments earlier. Sparks flew, and the runes on the altar dimmed, as if the ritual itself were being disrupted. Mira fought fiercely beside him, her sword clashing against iron, each blow sending reverberations through her arms. But for every statue they slowed, two more awakened, their crimson eyes burning with ancient wrath. "Varek, the blood!" Tarin shouted, his voice laced with desperation. He stood by the altar, hands trembling as he tried to reignite the fading runes. The realization struck Varek like a punch to the gut. Without the blood sacrifice, the ritual would fail, and the Bastion's guardians would not relent. Yet something in the Oathkeeper's expression unsettled him. There was a flicker of fear, of doubt, that should not have been there. Varek's instinct screamed that this ritual was wrong, a false promise wrapped in lies. He gritted his teeth, his thoughts racing. The ceremonial dagger in his hand felt like a curse, and the whispers from the shadows grew louder, pressing into his mind. Mira was being pushed back, and Varek knew he had seconds to decide. Blood for blood. That was the price. But whose blood? He spun to face Tarin, his gaze narrowing. "Tell me the truth," Varek demanded, stepping closer even as chaos erupted around them. "What aren't you telling us?" Tarin flinched, but before he could answer, one of the statues broke free from its pedestal, raising its sword high. Varek lunged forward, slashing with the dagger and feeling it bite into iron. The statue staggered, but Varek knew it wouldn't be enough. Suddenly, Mira was there, her blade a blur of motion as she deflected the statue's strike, saving Varek from a lethal blow. "We don't have time for this!" she yelled, her voice raw with urgency. Varek's heart pounded, but he turned back to Tarin, his resolve hardening. "Answer me," he demanded. Tarin's eyes met his, wide with something akin to terror. "The oath. It was never meant to be fulfilled," Tarin whispered. "It's a lie, a trap set by those who came before us." The weight of the words crashed into Varek. A false oath. The entire ritual was designed to bind them, to draw power from their blood without any hope of victory. Desperation surged through him, and he knew they had to find another way, or be consumed by the Bastion's deception. The Chamber of Vows trembled as the statues continued their relentless assault, but Varek's mind was fixated on Tarin's confession. A false oath, a trap woven by the Oathkeepers of the past. The realization sent a surge of anger through his veins, mingling with the fear and desperation that had taken root. Varek gripped the ceremonial dagger tighter, the weight of betrayal making his every breath feel like a struggle. "We've been pawns all along," he muttered, the truth cutting deeper than any blade. Mira, holding her ground against the Iron Guardian, shouted over her shoulder, "Varek, we need a plan now." Her armor was battered, and her movements were slowing, but her resolve never wavered. Varek's mind raced, searching for any way to break free from the ritual's deadly grip. The altar pulsed with dim, fading runes, a mockery of the power they'd been promised. He turned to Tarin, who looked paralyzed with guilt and fear. "We need to undo this," Varek demanded. "How do we break the Bastion's hold?" Tarin swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he pressed them against the altar's cold surface. "There is one way," he said, his voice cracking. "We must sever the oath from the blood that binds it, but it requires a life willingly given." Varek's heart twisted. A life for a life. Blood for blood. The Bastion's magic demanded sacrifice, but now it was a matter of choosing who would pay the ultimate price. The iron statues pressed closer, their movements relentless and merciless, a ticking clock counting down their doom. Mira's gaze met Varek's, and he saw the unspoken question in her eyes. Her life or his? He couldn't let her sacrifice herself. She had already given so much. But before he could speak, Tarin stepped forward, a new resolve hardening his features. "I am the Oathkeeper," he said, his voice steadier. "This was my burden to bear, and I have failed you both. Let me make this right." He drew a small silver blade from his robes, the reflection of the crimson light casting shadows across his face. Varek's throat tightened, a storm of emotions surging within him. He wanted to protest, to find another way, but the iron statues were almost upon them, and time had run out. Tarin placed the blade against his palm, and with a final sorrowful glance at Varek and Mira, he whispered an ancient incantation. The runes on the altar flared to life, and a wave of magic erupted, slamming into the statues and shattering them into shards of iron. The Bastion shuddered, and then silence. Tarin's body crumpled to the ground, the sacrifice complete. The silence in the Chamber of Vows was deafening, broken only by the soft crackle of fading magic. Varek's chest heaved as he stared at Tarin's lifeless form, the young Oathkeeper's final act echoing in the still air. Mira lowered her sword, her exhaustion evident in the way her shoulders slumped, yet her gaze remained resolute. "We're still standing," she said quietly, as though trying to make sense of the impossible. But Varek could only feel the weight of the betrayal, the false oath that had nearly destroyed them. He stepped forward, kneeling beside Tarin, whose face was serene in death. Varek's hands trembled as he whispered a silent promise, a vow to honor the sacrifice that had saved them. The altar's runes, now dull and cracked, seemed to mock him, a reminder of the Bastion's deceit. "It's over," he murmured, though the words felt hollow. The Iron Bastion had been built on lies, and the blood it demanded had always been for power, not protection. Yet the question lingered. What now? Mira placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch grounding him in the harsh reality they faced. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice firm. Varek looked up at her, seeing the weariness etched into her features, but also the flicker of hope that hadn't been extinguished. They had survived, but survival was not enough. The Bastion needed to change, or it would continue to consume those bound to it. He nodded, rising to his feet, his resolve hardening. The Bastion had taken too much, but they would make sure it took no more. As they made their way out of the chamber, the shadows seemed to retreat, and the iron statues lay in ruin, their power broken. Yet deep within the Bastion's walls, something shifted. A whisper of ancient magic, a remnant of the false oath that had almost claimed their lives. Varek couldn't shake the feeling that the Bastion was not done with them. But for now, they had won a fragile reprieve, and that had to be enough. Blood for blood. Sacrifice for survival. It was a brutal truth, but one they would face together. Outside, the crimson-streaked sky seemed to soften, as if mourning the fallen. Varek and Mira stepped into the fading light, carrying the scars of their ordeal, but also the strength forged in the heart of betrayal. They had survived the blood-forged betrayal, but the future was unwritten, a path yet to be carved from steel and truth. And as they left the Bastion behind, Varek knew one thing. They would forge a new fate, one not bound by the lies of the past.